They buried an empty coffin and called him dead. 5 winters later, she watched him ride over the ridge. I rode into Stone Hollow with frost in my beard, and no name I'd answer to. 5 winters does that to a man. Strips the name off him like wind off a fence post, leaves just the shape that's left standing. I told myself on the ride down from Fort Laramie that I wouldn't stop here first. Told myself I'd report to the quartermaster, collect what back pay the army owed a man they'd listed dead, find a room somewhere a stranger could sit quiet a spell before deciding what came next. I told myself a lot of things on that ride. My horse knew better than I did which road we were taking. The post hadn't changed. Same crooked sign hanging off one chain, swinging a little in the wind like it had a bad hip. Same smoke curling off the same stone chimney, thin and steady, the way smoke curls off a place that's been tended every single day without fail. Same split-rail fence around back, though it leaned worse than I remembered. 5 winters of frost heave will do that to a fence nobody's had 2 hands free to fix. I sat my horse at the tree line a long while before I came down off the ridge. Long enough my horse shifted his weight twice and blew out an impatient breath through his nose, the way he did when I made him stand still too long in the cold. Long enough the light started going that particular gray gold it goes in high country in late autumn, an hour or so shy of dark. I didn't come down because I'd decided I had the right to. I came down because the light was going, and a man can only sit a horse so long in failing light before the cold makes the decision for him. A woman came out onto the porch with an armful of wood. She stopped, set the wood down slow, like her arms had forgotten how to do anything but hold it. Ada. 5 years older. Same straight back, though I could see now, even at that distance, the way she carried herself, not stooped, never stooped but braced. Like a fence post that's taken a lot of wind and learned to lean into it rather than break. She didn't run to me. That was the first thing I understood about how it would have to be, and I understood it before I'd even gotten close enough to see her face plain. There's a story that gets told about a man who goes missing beyond a hard frontier, and it's always the same story, no matter whose mouth is telling it. The man rides out. The country swallows him. Enough seasons pass that hope becomes something people are embarrassed for you to still be carrying, like a coat you should have outgrown, and eventually somebody official enough writes his name on a list, and the list gets read out, and that's that. Closed, filed, grieved, and put away. I heard my own version of that story secondhand, from a freighter who didn't know who I was riding beside on the road up from the fort, and told it like a story he enjoyed telling, the way men enjoy telling any story that's sad enough to be satisfying and doesn't touch them personal. Scout named Rourke, he said. Rode north scouting past the Yellow Fork with 4 other men, into country the map still had blank patches in. Blizzard came early that year, closed every pass for going on 2 winters running. Nobody'd ever seen weather hold a country hostage that long, not in that man's lifetime nor his father's. When the passes finally opened, word came down there wasn't a man left alive up there. Army held services. 5 markers went up at the fort cemetery, side by side, and the chaplain said the words over 4 of them. The 5th, he said, the 5th belonged to a girl who kept a trading post out past the fork in the road, and she wouldn't let the chaplain finish. Stood right there at the graveside and said no. Said she wasn't burying a man she hadn't seen dead. Made them dig the plot but wouldn't let them set the stone proper, wouldn't let the words get said, kept the whole business half-finished like a sentence nobody was allowed to end. 2 years she kept a lamp burning in her post's high window, the freighter said, warming up now, enjoying himself. Every night. Rain, snow, didn't matter. Folks up and down that road took to using it for a landmark, though nobody said so where she could hear it, on account of nobody wanted to be the one to name out loud what it actually was. Foolish is what it was, the freighter said. Foolish and a little sad, though he allowed there was something in it that got you, sitting a wagon alone on that road at night, and seeing that one small light burning for a man everyone else had let go. I didn't tell him I was the man. I rode on another 2 miles before I had to stop and get down off my horse and stand a while with my hand flat against a tree trunk, breathing. I hadn't known about the coffin, hadn't known about the chaplain or the 2 years of the lamp, though I'd have wagered my life it wasn't only 2. I'd have wagered it was every year since, straight through to the one I was riding into now. A man who's been where I'd been learns to distrust anything that looks like it's waiting for him. Learns it the hard way, in a place where waiting got dressed up as rescue more than once and turned out to be nothing of the kind. So when I finally came within sight of Stone Hollow that first evening and saw the small orange eye of that lamp already lit against the coming dark, high in the post's second story, I didn't feel what a man's supposed to feel coming home. I felt afraid, genuinely bone-deep afraid, in a way I hadn't let myself feel in 5 years of country that gave a man plenty of reason to. Afraid I'd walk up that road and find out the story wasn't true. Afraid it was true and I didn't deserve what it meant. Afraid, worst of all, that I'd become something in those 5 years that a lamp like that had no business waiting for. I sat my horse and looked at that light a long time before I let myself move toward it. Ada's post sat where the wagon road forked, half a day's ride from the fort in one direction, a full hard day from anywhere rightly called a town in the other. Her father had built it 20 years back, when the territory was younger and wilder and a man could still stake a claim on a crossroads and make a living off travelers needing flour, powder, boot leather, and a fair price on both. He died the winter before I shipped north. Heart gave out in his sleep, peaceful as these things go, though there's no peaceful version of a daughter finding her father cold in his bed at sunrise. Ada took the post over herself. 22 years old, no brothers, no uncles close enough to matter, and half the freighters on that road took bets on how long she'd last before she sold up and moved back east to whatever family her mother's people still had there. She was still running it 5 years later when I rode in. Kept the books herself, kept the shelves stocked through means I'd come to understand had cost her considerably more sweat and considerably more nerve than the freighters who bet against her ever gave her credit for. Kept a Sharps rifle mounted over the counter that everybody who came through understood, without needing to be told twice, that she knew precisely how to use. She was 22 the day I left, same age as when she took the post. Stood in that same dooryard with her hair coming loose from its pins in the wind, and told me she'd wait. I told her not to promise a thing like that. Told her plain, because I owed her plain even if it cost me something to say it. A scout's word beyond the frontier line is worth exactly nothing when it comes to promises made behind him. You go where the army sends you, into country half the time nobody's properly mapped, and you don't get to choose whether you come back changed, or come back broken, or come back at all. I'd seen men ride out whole and get carried back on a travois missing pieces of themselves no surgeon could account for. I'd seen worse than that too, though I didn't tell her so at the time. She promised anyway. Said a promise wasn't hers to take back just because it scared me to hold. I've turned that sentence over in my mind more times in 5 years than I could rightly count. A promise isn't hers to take back just because it scared him to hold. I understood it as a young man's foolish comfort, riding north that first week. By the second winter beyond the fork, I understood it as something closer to a rope a man throws himself down a dark hole, not knowing if there's anything at the bottom to catch him, trusting the rope more than the dark. I came down off that ridge, because a man can only sit still so long watching a light he doesn't believe he's earned. She was on the porch when I rode in, same as I'd seen her from the tree line, would set down at her feet where she'd left it. Didn't run. Stood with one hand flat against the porch rail like she needed something solid under it to keep from doing something else entirely, run to me, or run from me, or simply fold up where she stood. I couldn't tell which, and I don't believe she could have told me either, not in that first minute. Sila's, she said. Not a question. Just my name, tried out loud after 5 years of not getting to say it to my face, and something in the way she said it told me she'd practiced saying it plenty in private, in case this day ever came, and none of that practice had prepared her for how it would actually feel. Ada. The wind moved through the pines behind the post, that particular high country sound like the trees are breathing slow. Somewhere behind her a door banged, and a boy's voice called out something I didn't catch. Not mine. Never mine. Some hired hand's son. I'd learn later, name of Danny. Come to help her through the harvest season and stayed on through the winters since because Ada Calloway wasn't a woman who let a hardworking boy go without work simply because the season changed, and she didn't turn to it. Kept looking at me like I might be smoke that would clear if she blinked hard enough. They told me you were dead, she said. I know it. I didn't believe them. I know that too. I saw your lamp coming down the road, saw it from 3 miles off. Her jaw went tight. Something crossed her face I didn't have a clean name for in that moment. Not joy, though I'd hoped, foolishly, that joy might be some part of it. Closer to fury. The particular fury of a person who's carried a weight a very long time and finally gets to set it down, only to discover setting it down hurts nearly as much as carrying it did. 5 years, she said. You couldn't send word. 1 letter, Sila's. 1 line on a torn page given to any rider passing through who might have. I couldn't. Couldn't. She said the word like she was testing its weight, finding it wanting. No. That's not an answer that holds up, Sila's Rourke. Not after 5 years of me standing on this porch, every time a rider came up that road, hoping. I waited for the rest of it, because I understood she had more, and understood she'd earned the right to say all of it before I said one more word in my own defense. But she didn't finish. Just looked at me and looked at me, and I watched 5 years of a particular kind of grief war against whatever was standing right in front of her, plainly alive, plainly changed, and plainly not offering the explanation she'd waited 5 years to receive. That's all you've got, she said finally, flat. That's all I've got today. She let me stable the horse myself, out back in the small barn her father had built, where 2 mules and a pair of workhorses shifted and blew at the smell of a stranger. Didn't invite me into the house proper. Put me instead in the old trapper's cabin out back, the one her father used to rent to trail hands passing through for a night's lodging, and she brought me a plate herself instead of sending the boy Danny, though she didn't say 10 words doing it. I ate like a man who'd half-forgotten food came served on a plate with a fork beside it, rather than off the point of a knife, or raw, or not at all. She watched me eat. I felt it more than saw it, sitting across the small table with her hands folded in her lap, the old habit of watching each other's hands that we'd fallen into as courting young people, back when we thought we had all the time in the world to learn each other's small movements, and I understood, watching her watch me, that she was doing the same thing now for an entirely different reason. Cataloging what had changed. Looking for the boy she remembered inside the man sitting across from her, and not finding him easily. The post's in trouble, she said finally. Not soft, not an opening to something gentler. A fact laid down between us on the table like she needed somewhere else to put her eyes besides my face. Who's doing? Man named Garrick Voss. Runs the freight concern out of the fort. Has done for 3 years now. He's been buying up debt paper on every small post along this stretch of road, offers credit at harvest when a body's low on cash, calls the note due midwinter when nobody's got 2 coins to rub together, and takes the post as payment when they can't cover it. Done it to the Hendersons out past Cutbank. Done it to Old Marsh at the crossing. Mine included, he's put in 3 offers this year alone, each one lower than the last, like he's testing how desperate I've gotten. You said no 3 times. I said no 3 times. Her chin came up, and for just a moment I saw the girl who'd stood in that same dooryard 5 years back and told me a promise wasn't hers to take back. I wasn't going to hand over the one thing I still had full say over. Not to him, not to anybody. I understood that better than she knew, sitting there in a cabin I had no more claim to than a stranger might. 5 years beyond the last thing in my life that had felt like it belonged to me. I didn't sleep that first night. Sat up in the trapper's cabin with the door cracked to the cold so I could see the lamp still lit in her high window, same as I had from the ridge, and I thought long and hard about all the ways a man tells the truth without telling the whole of it, and whether that counted in the end as a kind of lying. There's a kind of silence that protects a person, shields them from a weight they didn't ask to carry and shouldn't be made to. And there's a kind of silence that only protects the man staying silent, dressed up to look like the first kind so he doesn't have to examine too closely what it actually is. I hadn't sorted out yet that first night which one I was doing to her. I suspect, if I'm honest with the telling of this, I already knew and simply wasn't ready to say so, not to her and not fully to myself either. Morning came hard and blue-white. An early snow starting in the high peaks that year, weeks ahead of what the almanac had promised. I found Ada already out at the woodpile before full light, an axe in her hands, swinging it with more force than the wood strictly required, swinging it. I understood, like she'd rather be swinging it at something else entirely, and the wood simply happened to be what was in front of her. I came up quiet and took the axe from her without asking. She let me, stood back and watched, arms crossed against the cold, breath fogging in the gray light. That told me something too, not forgiveness, not yet, not by a long stretch, but the first small inch of a door she hadn't slammed shut behind her the night before. We worked without talking a good hour, maybe more. The rhythm of it came back to me easier than words did. She'd stack. I'd split. Same motion we'd fallen into 100 mornings before I ever shipped north, back when her father was still alive, and none of what came after had happened to either of us yet. My hands remembered the weight of an axe better than my tongue remembered how to explain 5 years of silence. "Garrick's coming by today," she said eventually, not looking up from the stack she was building. "Time for his fourth, no, unless the man's finally learned to count past 3. I'll be here. I didn't ask you to be. I know it. I'm telling you I will be, whether you asked or not." She looked at me then. Really looked, in a way she hadn't quite let herself since the porch the evening before, took in the gray starting at my temples that hadn't been there 5 years back. The scar along my jaw she didn't have a story for yet. The particular stillness I carried now that I hadn't carried as a younger man. The stillness of somebody who's learned that sudden movement in certain country gets a man killed. "You look like a man who's been somewhere I can't ask about," she said. "I have. Will you tell me?" "Someday." I set down the axe, met her eyes square, because I owed her that much even where I couldn't yet give her the words. "Not today. I'm not ready to hand it to you today, Ada. And if I tried, I don't believe I'd hand it to you honest." She nodded slow, like that was an answer she could live inside a while longer, though I could see plain in her eyes that accepting it cost her something real, same as refusing it would have cost me something I wasn't yet able to pay. Garrick Voss came at midday, riding in with 2 hired men and a wagon carrying nothing at all, which told me straight off the wagon wasn't the point of the visit. He was a big man gone soft through the middle in the particular way of men who have mistaken a full purse for a full measure of themselves, dressed better than the road strictly called for, the kind of man who wore his prosperity the way other men wore a weapon, as something meant to be seen and to intimidate by the seeing. He looked at me standing on the porch beside Ada, and I watched something in his face do quick, unpleasant arithmetic. "Didn't know the post had taken on help," he said, not troubling to get down off his horse. "He's not help," Ada said level. "Then what's he?" "Mine to explain or not, Garrick. Not yours to ask, and not yours to know unless I choose to tell it." His eyes cut to me, weighing, the way a man weighs an obstacle he hadn't planned into his calculations. "Silas Rourke," I said before he could ask outright. "Scout, formerly of the army, discharged." I didn't offer more, didn't owe him more, and something in me understood that the less a man like Garrick knew about where I'd been, the better positioned I'd stay to deal with him plainly. "Rourke," he said the name like he was tasting something gone off. "Heard that name before. Thought you were in a grave up past the Yellow Fork. There was talk of it at the fort. A scout come back from the dead. Some story going round the taverns this week. Talk travels faster than a man rides these days, seems like. Does at that." He recovered his salesman's smile quicker than I'd have credited him for, turning back to Ada with the particular old charm of a man used to getting his way through patience and repetition rather than force. "Well, Ada, my offer stands, same as always. Best price you'll see this side of the territory, and it won't stand forever, not with the roads going the way they're headed this winter. I'd hate to see you holding a post nobody can reach and nobody can supply, all for the sake of pride." "My answer stands too," Ada said. "Same as it stood 3 times before this." Garrick's smile thinned at the edges, though he kept it fixed in place. 4th time's rarely the charm in my experience. "Then you'll learn something new today," I said. His eyes came back to me, and held there a long moment cataloging, same as before, though with something colder in it now. Then he touched his hat brim, more mockery in the gesture than courtesy, and turned his horse and his empty wagon back toward the road. "He'll be back," Ada said, once he'd gone small in the distance, dust settling behind him. "I expect he will. You didn't have to stand there." "I know it. Why'd you, then?" I looked at her a long moment before I answered, because the true answer had more weight in it than I was yet prepared to hand over whole, and I wasn't about to lie to her twice in 2 days. "Because I spent 5 years not able to stand anywhere at all," I said finally. "Not 1 square foot of ground I could rightly call mine to defend. Figured, given the chance, I'd start here, if you'll let me." She didn't answer that directly, but she didn't tell me to leave either, and in the language we were slowly relearning between us, I understood that for what it was, not yes, not yet, but no longer quite a no. The days took a shape after that, though not the shape of before. Nothing between us was going to reclaim the shape of before, not with what sat unspoken like a third presence in every room we occupied together, but a shape all the same. And a man who spent 5 years with no shape to his days at all learns to be grateful for even an uncertain one. I fixed what needed fixing, and there was plenty. The post's back fence, sagging bad since her father's time, frost-heaved and leaning like a drunk man against a wall. The chimney draw, gone poor with a bird's nest lodged where it oughtn't be, filling the front room with smoke on windy mornings till Ada had taken to opening the door even in the cold rather than choke on it. The hinges on the storeroom door, the loose board on the 3rd porch step, a dozen small failures that accumulate in 5 years of one woman and one hired boy trying to hold together a place built for a family with more hands than that. I split wood till my palms remembered the calluses they'd worn thin and soft in 5 years of a very different kind of labor. Mended tack. Rode the fence line checking for breaks, partly for the honest work of it and partly, I'll admit, because riding alone through open country had become, in those 5 years, the only way I knew to think clear. Ada watched all of it with an expression I came to know over those first weeks, as her considering look, not forgiveness. Not yet, but a woman doing sums in her head and not liking every column she found there, weighing what she saw against what she'd waited 5 years to see, and not yet certain the two matched close enough to trust. Danny, the hired boy, 14, gangly, all elbows and questions, took to following me around the property with the particular hero worship of a boy who's grown up around freighters and trappers, and never once met a man who'd actually been beyond the frontier line, and lived to talk about it, even sparingly. "Is it true you were dead 2 whole years?" he asked me once, helping me restring a section of fence, the words coming out before he'd thought better of asking them. Wasn't dead a single day of it, I told him, just further off than anybody could reach. What's it like out there? I thought a long while on how to answer a boy that question honest, without handing him something too heavy for 14 years to carry. Cold, I said finally. Colder than anything you felt on this side of the mountains, even in a hard winter here, and quiet in a way that gets inside a man and stays there. You learn things about yourself out in that kind of quiet that you mightn't have learned any other way. Good things. Some. Not all. He seemed to understand, in the way boys sometimes understand more than grown folks credit them for, that the conversation had reached the edge of what I was willing to say, and he let it lie there without pushing further, which told me something decent about how Ada had raised him up in her care, whatever blood claim she did or didn't have on him. At night I sat outside the trapper's cabin and watched her lamp in the high window, and some nights she came out onto her own porch across the yard, and we sat like that, two separate small lights not quite touching, close enough that a person standing between us might have felt the warmth off each, neither one of us reaching first across the distance that still lay between the porch and the cabin, wide as 5 years and twice as hard to cross. "Tell me one true thing," she said one such night, her voice carrying soft across the dark yard, the first stars showing thin through cloud. "Just one thing, doesn't have to be the whole of it. I understand now you're not ready to give me the whole of it." I thought a long while before I answered. "I thought about your lamp every single night I was gone," I said finally. "Even the nights I didn't rightly believe I'd live to see another one lit, especially those nights if I'm honest." She didn't answer right away. I heard across the yard what might have been a breath caught and held, or might have been the wind. But the next morning there were 2 plates set out on the porch rail instead of 1 plate carried out to the cabin by Danny, and she didn't send the boy to fetch me any more after that. I ate at her table across from her, same as before all of it, though the before sat between our 2 plates like an uninvited guest neither one of us named out loud. Not yet, not for a good while longer. Garrick came back inside the week, same as Ada had predicted he would. This time he didn't trouble himself with a wagon of nothing to give the visit the shape of ordinary business. "Word's out along the road," he said, sitting his horse in the yard, not bothering to dismount, which I'd come to understand as his particular way of signaling he didn't intend to stay long enough for the visit to count as neighborly. "Word's out the supply train's not making it through the North Pass this winter. Bridge went out at Cotter's Creek back in September, and there's no crew coming to fix it before spring thaw, not with the Army's engineers stretched thin as they are this year. That's your resupply route, Ada, same as it's everybody's on the stretch. Without it you're finished by January, same as the Hendersons were finished, same as Old Marsh." "I know the pass," I said, before Ada could frame her own answer. Garrick's eyes cut to me, some genuine surprise in them this time under the practiced smoothness. "Do you now? Scouted that whole stretch of country 3 seasons running, before I shipped north 5 years back. There's a lower crossing east of Cotter's Creek, rough going, narrow in 2 places where a wagon's got to thread careful, but passable, if the driver knows the ground and isn't fool enough to try it after a fresh snow's covered the markers. Nobody knows that ground half as well as you'd like folks to believe, I'd wager," Garrick said, a sneer creeping into the edges of his practiced smoothness now, the first crack I'd seen in it. "You're welcome to wager against it. I'll take that bet plain if it comes to proving out." He held my eyes a long moment, weighing again, same as that first day, and I watched him do the sum and not care for the total, same as before. Then he looked back to Ada, some new calculation working behind his eyes. "Offer's still open," he said. "Better take it before you're holding a post with no goods left to sell out of it, and no husband-shaped stranger to keep pretending's going to save you from what's coming." "Get off my land, Garrick," Ada said, and there wasn't a thing soft left in her voice. He went, slower this time than either time before, like a man recalculating his approach rather than simply retreating. That night I found Ada out at the fence line, checking a post that I'd already checked and mended myself 2 days prior. The way a person does when their hands need occupying while their thoughts run somewhere they'd rather not sit still with. "You'd really take a wagon over that low crossing," she said. Not quite a question, more a thing she needed to hear confirmed out loud. "I'd take it myself if it came down to that, alone if I had to." "Why?" "Because your post is the one thing in this whole territory that stayed exactly where I left it," I said, and the words came easier than I'd expected them to. 5 years of holding things unsaid finally starting to loosen somewhere behind my ribs. Everything else changed on me. This didn't. I don't intend to let Garrick Voss be the reason that finally changes now, not after everything it's cost you to keep it standing. She was quiet a long moment, arms wrapped tight against the cold, breath showing pale. "You still haven't told me where you were," she said finally, and there was less anger in it now than there'd been that first evening on the porch, more something that sounded closer to grief looking for a place to land. 5 years, Silas. I buried an empty box in the ground and wouldn't let the chaplain say his words over it, and half this territory thought I'd gone half foolish for it, lighting a lamp every night for a man everybody else had let go of. And you still haven't told me why you let me believe you might be dead, when apparently you were somewhere with enough sense left in you to remember exactly which window my lamp burned in. I know. That's not an answer. No, I said, it's not yet, but I'm going to give you one, Ada, I promise you that. Just not standing out here in the cold, with Garrick Voss's voice still hanging in the yard. She turned to go back toward the house, stopped at the door, hand on the frame, not quite looking back at me. "I'm not asking because I doubt you were somewhere terrible," she said, quiet to the door rather than to me. "I've got enough sense to have worked that much out on my own, from the way you carry yourself now, and the way you go still sometimes in the middle of a sentence like something's caught up behind your eyes. I'm asking because I want to carry some of it with you. That's what 5 years of waiting ought to earn a person, I'd think. The right to carry some of the weight, instead of just standing outside it wondering." The door closed soft behind her. Softer, I noted, than a door slamming would have hurt. I told her 3 nights later, in the front room of the post itself, a fire going low and Danny sent off to bed early on some pretext Ada invented that fooled neither of us, but that the boy accepted gracious enough, understanding without being told that grown folks sometimes needed a room to themselves. I didn't tell her all of it. A man doesn't hand over the whole of a thing like that in one sitting, and some part of what I carried out of that country wasn't mine alone to give away. It belonged, in fairness, to men who'd ridden in beside me and never once ridden back out, and their part of the story wasn't mine to spend on easing my own conscience. But I told her the shape of it. I told her about the outpost we'd built beyond the Yellow Fork, meant to hold a season while we scouted a stretch of country the Army's maps still had blank patches drawn across. I told her about the blizzard that came 3 weeks early that first year, and didn't lift, and sealed every pass behind us tighter than any door, a storm that held that whole stretch of high country hostage a full season and a half longer than any man's experience or any almanac had ever accounted for. I told her that when the thaw finally came, it wasn't the thaw any of us had waited for, that half the men who'd ridden in with me that first autumn didn't ride back out at all, taken by cold and hunger, and the particular slow despair of watching a season you were promised would end simply refused to. I told her that the Army's own dispatch riders, the ones meant to carry word of us back down the line to the fort, and eventually to her, never made it further than the first pass before the second winter's snow closed the trail again behind them, and that by the time a rider finally did get through, whole seasons had already been marked closed on paper, men already declared and grieved and filed. 5 markers already standing at the fort cemetery with my name carved on one of them. I told her I'd written letters through all of it. Dozens, maybe more than dozens, kept folded inside my coat lining like a fool, because there'd been nowhere on God's earth to send them from that country, and some stubborn, foolish piece of me hadn't been able to stop writing them anyway, hadn't been able to accept that a letter with no road to travel was still, somehow, worth writing. "I've still got them," I said, "every one. If you ever want to read what a dead man wrote you across 2 winters, he didn't believe he'd survive." Her eyes had gone wet somewhere partway through the telling, tears standing bright in the low firelight, but she didn't look away from me, not once, and didn't interrupt, and I understood that as its own kind of gift, a woman who'd waited 5 years finally letting herself simply listen, without needing to fill the silence with a question. "Someday," she said when I'd finished. "Not tonight. Tonight I just want to sit here and know it's you holding them out to me, and not some ghost wearing your face and telling me a story to ease my mind." I put my hand flat on the small table between our 2 chairs. Didn't reach for hers, didn't presume that far. Just left it there, open, an offering laid out plain, and let her decide in her own time what she wanted to do with the distance still sitting between us. She looked at my hand a long moment. Then she put hers over it. That was the whole of it that night. No more words needed doing that particular work, and I understood, sitting there with her hand warm over mine in the low firelight, that something had shifted between us that wasn't going to shift back. Winter came on hard after that, same as Garrick had predicted it would, though I doubt he predicted how it would end up serving against him rather than for him. The North Pass closed exactly as the freighters along the road had warned, the bridge at Cotter's Creek still unrepaired, and the fort's supply train stopped running that stretch of road entirely, leaving every small post along it, Ada's included, facing a long, hungry winter unless somebody found another way through. I took the low crossing myself in the first week of December, 3 days out and 3 days back with a hired wagon and a driver named Ferris who'd worked the road long enough to trust a scout's judgment over a merchant's promises. It was hard going, worse than I'd let on to Ada beforehand, one stretch where the trail narrowed to barely a wagon's width along a rock face, ice thick enough underfoot that Ferris walked the mules through by hand rather than risk driving them. Both of us half frozen and half certain the whole gambit was a fool's errand that would end with the wagon lost down a ravine and both of us walking home, if we made it home at all. But I knew that ground. Had walked it enough seasons before the army ever sent me north that my feet remembered turns my conscious mind had half forgotten, and we came through it in the end, 3 days out, 3 days back, exactly as I'd promised, with the wagon intact, and the post shelves stocked through clean to spring, flour and powder and coffee, and the dozen other small necessities that meant the difference between a hard winter and a broken one. Garrick Voss stopped riding out to Stone Hollow with offers after that. Word came through Danny, who heard it from a freighter passing through, that Garrick had tried one more thing before he gave up the campaign entirely. Spread talk through the fort, and the taverns that Ada's post was cursed, unlucky, run by a woman who kept company with a man risen out of an empty grave, the kind of ghost talk meant to scare off skittish trade and skittish trappers from doing business anywhere near Stone Hollow. It didn't work the way he'd hoped. If anything, it brought folks out curious to see the truth of it for themselves, and what they found, riding up that road through the last hard weeks of winter, was a post better stocked and better tended than it had been in years. Shelves full, fences mended, chimney drawing clean, with a woman behind the counter who looked, for what Danny told me was the first time since her father died, like she wasn't carrying the whole weight of the place alone on 2 shoulders built for one person's burden. I asked her in March, when the last of the deep snow was going gray and soft at the fence line, and the light in her high window had long since stopped feeling, to me, like a thing I hadn't earned the right to look at. I didn't have a ring to offer. Didn't have much of anything at all, if truth be told. 5 years beyond the frontier line had stripped a man down close to what he could carry on his own back and no further, and I'd spent what little back pay the army finally released to me on lumber and hinges, and a new length of fence wire, on making the post whole again rather than on making myself presentable for the asking. What I had, standing in that yard with the mud of early spring soft underfoot, was a promise, plain as the one she'd made me 5 years before I ever rode north. Except this time I intended to keep it standing right in front of her, where she could watch me keep it, instead of somewhere beyond a frontier line she couldn't see or reach or hold me to. "I can't give you back the 5 years," I said. "Can't undo the coffin they dug, or the 2 years of that lamp, or every single night you sat up in that high window not knowing whether the light you were keeping meant anything at all, or whether you'd become, same as the freighters whispered behind your back, a foolish woman keeping vigil for a dead man." "I don't want them undone," she said, and there was something steady in her voice now that hadn't been there that first evening on the porch. "I want to know what comes next. That's the only question I've got left, Silas. Not what happened. What comes next?" "What comes next," I said, "is I stay, however long you'll have me standing in this yard. I've had 5 years' worth of leaving to last me the rest of whatever's left of this life, and I don't intend to spend one more day of it anywhere you aren't." She didn't answer right away. Looked at me a long moment the way she had that very first day on the porch, checking, I understood, whether I might still be smoke that would clear if she blinked hard enough. 5 months of proof standing in front of her, not quite enough yet to fully silence 5 years of grief. Then she said, "The lamp's still up there in the window. Been burning 5 years now for a man who might never come back at all. I'd like it to burn from here on for one who already did, and who's standing right here proving it instead." That was her yes. I understood it plain as any words could have made it, and I've never once, in all the years since, been wrong about what it meant. We were married that June in the yard of Stone Hollow Post, under the same crooked sign that hadn't changed through any of it, 5 years of my absence, 5 months of my slow return, and everything that had passed between the two. Half the fort turned out for it, more curious folk than close friends, if truth be told, drawn by a story that had traveled the length of the territory by then. The scout risen out of an empty grave, the woman who wouldn't let them close the coffin. Even Garrick Voss sent a wagon of goods as a wedding gift, unasked and unexpected, which Ada accepted with the particular quiet satisfaction of a woman receiving an apology dressed up as generosity, and letting the giver believe she hadn't seen through the dressing. Danny stood up at the front of the gathering looking prouder than any hired boy had rightful cause to look at somebody else's wedding, and I understood, watching him, that Ada had built more of a family out of that post in 5 years alone than most folks manage in a lifetime with every advantage handed to them. The lamp still burns in the high window, every single night, same as it did through 5 long winters of waiting and has done every winter since. Folks passing on the road still ask about it, some of them, the ones who have heard the story secondhand from a freighter who enjoys the telling, the scout who came back from a grave nobody would finish digging, and the woman who kept a light burning long enough to call him the whole way home. I tell them the truth of it, near enough as makes no difference, that a light left burning long enough, faithful enough, has a way of finding a man wherever the country's put him, even from further off than any map has a name for, even from beyond a frontier line that swallowed better men than me and never gave them back at all. And most nights now, once the post is shut up for the evening and the last wagons rolled on down the road toward the fork, I sit out on that porch with my wife beside me, her hand finding mine same as it did that first night by the fire, and I look up at that high window and I think, some men spend their whole lives searching after a light like that, never once finding it, no matter how far or how hard they ride. I only had to find my way back to the one that was already lit and waiting, and had been the whole time I was gone.